Peacetime leaders is a great time. When everything is going great, it's easy. When the company's making money, it's fantastic to be a CEO. When the country's not at war, it's great to be a president or a prime minister.
And boom, we are live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals Podcast, episode number 42. I'm your host, Stefano. And guys, I am so excited for this conversation today. This conversation is going to be a politically driven conversation for the Canadian citizen that's maybe has some political questions or is concerned with some of the things that are going on, like crime and everything in relation to that. This conversation is for you. My guest today is a former police officer, former resource officer, and he is the successful Oakville East candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. And he is a very, very proud Canadian. So guys, I want to welcome Ron Chhinzer to the podcast.
Thanks, Stefano. Thank you for having me as well. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. We were just chopping it up there before, probably just getting into some amazing conversation. And I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. I appreciate you coming on. And like I was saying to you a little bit before, your ability to unpack some of the things that are happening in Canadian politics surrounding crime specifically is just amazing. And I got to give you a big kudos to that. You look at your social media and your talks and some of these sessions that you're holding, you're really able to unpack and unfold some of the major issues that we're experiencing and that Canadians have questions about. So I think your precision and your ability to be so concise with the way you unpack these issues is very well done. And we're going to get into a lot of that today. I'm looking forward to getting into that. But sort of where I want to start, Ron, is for the viewer that's listening that maybe doesn't know Ron Chhinzer or maybe does know Ron and kind of wants to know a little bit more, explain to everybody who is Ron Chhinzer and how did your journey kind of lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks for the compliments as well. I think to preface, I think one of the most important things, part of that is I got to give kudos to my grade 10 English teacher.
Amazing.
So my grade 10 English teacher, when I was always good at English and I was always good at speaking, but what happened is in grade 10, I would write essays and I would put all these big words into it. And my grade 10 English teacher pulls me aside. My favorite teacher, I had him from grade 9 all the way through OAC at the time. He said, look, Ron, he goes, you're a smart guy, but being smart is not making being smart is not making little things big. It's making big things little.
Okay.
And that for whatever reason just etched in my brain. And I go, oh, okay, it makes sense. So really communicating complex ideas as simply as possible is something that really I focused on from 10th grade. So I got to give him a shout out.
I love that.
Thank you to him. In regards to who I am, look, the most simplest version, look, I'm the youngest of 4 kids. My parents immigrated here from India in 1970. I was lucky to be born in Toronto.
Okay.
Proud Canadian. You know, all of us kids were born in Toronto. My parents went through hardships like everybody else. But, we had a relatively good upbringing, stayed as tight as possible. We were all raised to be strong, independent, and, to dig your heels in.
Yeah.
Culturally, with our culture and our religion, it's also very justice focused. So that's embedded to you early on. Long story short, I end up as a police officer at the age of 23. I get hired, 24, I'm a full-fledged police officer. I was working in Toronto Police at the time. In Toronto Police, as you had mentioned, I'd worked in the soft community stuff, more community-facing things in Rexdale, which I absolutely love. I consider Rexdale a second home to me just based off of those experiences. Was involved as a school officer, got involved in the detective office, ended up going to headquarters. Then I got the corporate side of policing, which is a very important side, which people don't understand that well. And then after that, I came to actually this area that we're in now in 14 Division.
Oh, wow.
I worked down here and on the streets and in a major crime unit, did really well here. And then I got the call to go to the Gun and Gang Task Force. Went to the Gun and Gang Task Force for a couple years. Left for a short period of time because I was burnt out. I had young kids at the time. My wife was really stressed out. Crime was starting to get bad. Court cases started to go topsy-turvy on us. The court system started to get a little bit wild. And then I got called back in 2017 to start the Gang Prevention Task Force with the focus of how do we get a gang member out of a gang. Over 4 years, I became a national expert at that. We created the largest gang exit program in the world that we know of. 1,000 people have been intervened or prevented to go down the life path. 750 males under the age of 21 for gangs, and 250 girls that were at risk or involved in human trafficking. That's the professional side. Additionally, I owned a gym as well. I've always had a business, so I've always liked the entrepreneurship side. To me, entrepreneurship was never about making money. It was about making a dream come true. And, we always tell kids, chase your dreams. It was always a dream of mine to own something. I did all that. Personally, I've been volunteering since I was 18, so I got like 24 years of volunteer work, different levels, coaching, at-risk kids, creating programs, sitting on boards of directors, being an advisor and a consultant to some major stuff, which I'm really proud of. And then throughout all that process, got politically involved. I was very fortunate enough to be the first person to run under Pierre Poilievre in a Mississauga Lakeshore by-election. We ran a really sleeper campaign there just to understand the landscape. Wasn't successful, stayed politically involved. Unfortunately and fortunately, both ways, I resigned from policing a year ago.
Okay.
For a couple reasons. One, as a police officer, once you're politically involved, your voice is muzzled for a few reasons, which I agree with. But I knew it was so important for me to continue to pursue the path of politics because all the changes I wanted to make as a cop, I realized I couldn't make as a cop. They had to be legislative changes and had to be done from a place of influence. And I wanted to create that roadway and pathway. And luckily, I had a really great leader named Pierre Poilievre who recognized what I'd been advocating for years and said, we'd love to have you a part of a team. This is totally up the Conservative Valley. Amazing. I was so lucky and fortunate for him and the rest of the team to really take me in. Now I have a second opportunity as the candidate for Oakville East. But currently I work for a financial technology company in Canada, which is great. They saw other uses for me. They saw some of the other strengths to help in the leadership, the organization, relationships. And here I am as a candidate, as a VP of a fintech company, as a former police officer, still heavily involved and still as a volunteer. And I love meeting guys like you who I consider ambitious, the right type of people where I said, guys like yourself are definitely the type of people where I'm 10 years older than you, but I don't look at it like that. I'm like, this is somebody I want to both together. Support and be with.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for having me. That's the longest story short.
100%. And so well said. And I love how you started with that connection with your teacher because, which we'll get into your time as a resource officer. You've been a mentor for so many. And to hear that you had once a mentor too, it's so optimistic when you think about it because impact is real. And that impact that you have on that next generation is so real. That's a pivotal moment for you. And it's amazing to hear you unpack that.
It is. It was. And it still continues to be. It's in those moments of either when you're a mentor, you have a mentor. Look, I have a different view on things currently. And the reason why I say currently is it allows me the opportunity and the leverage to, in 5 years from now, change my mind. So like we were having a conversation coming up here and I was saying, I don't really believe in absolutes when people are like, you should always do this, you should always do that. Maybe, but you have to open up to say, maybe if things change, things will change. Right. And be easy with the flow. Now, when it comes down to the mentorship and all that stuff, I'm a big believer in, you don't know when it's happening. There are sit-down sessions where you'll find somebody that you want mentorship from. That's very organized, and those are so valuable because it gives you time to think beforehand. You can draw, you can research the person, have a list of questions, be very specific. And that's important to have, and we should always be searching for that. But additionally, you have no idea on the impacts others have on you and that you have on others, nor, in my belief, should that be a part of the thought process. We should just be normal human beings, and you go, wow, I really like that. I have a joke, I call it R&D. Rob and duplicate. So if I like something you're doing, I'm taking that. That's for me to have. Yeah. And I'll see everybody doing different things, doesn't matter who you are, and I'll see you do something or say something, I'll be like, I like that.
Yes.
That's mine now.
Yes.
So I think the mentorship is super important, but I don't think it's as complicated as what people make it out to be. I think if you're just a good person, try to do your best, try not to screw anybody over, and you're educated and credible in where you're at, I think naturally you have impact.
It sort of just happens, right? Without you knowing, you're putting your best foot forward, and then the impact is significant. It's a beautiful thing. Bruce Lee once said, "Use what is useful and discard what is not." Taking in what everything that you can, and I like this, I don't really like this, and we're not married to our ideas, right? No. We're evolving, we're growing, and where we were at one point is maybe not where we're at the next, but it's all a part of the journey.
Things change.
Yeah,
things always
do change.
Nothing is forever. Things change. One quote I kind of tell myself. I actually will say this to myself. It always gets better.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Always. It's just such a simple thing where, as a police officer, you see the end of life all the time. Suicide. Additionally, people with, stage 4 cancer that die at home, death at home orders, people with dementia that have died twice. One, when they lose their mind, literally. Yes. They don't know who they are and they don't recognize their family. And it's so painful for those families to live with somebody that doesn't even know who they are. Right. And you kind of see how they operate. And, even with people who have stage 4 cancer and they pass away, I still apply that. It's better. In a very optimistic, simplified version.
Yeah.
It just makes life easier at the low points to say, it's going to get better.
It really is the mentality. I have to ask you about that. Where do you get this? Where did you garner or sort of develop this mentality, this optimistic mentality, this purpose of serving people and helping your community, whether it be policing or politically? Was it something in your upbringing? Was it from your family values? How did that kind of look for you?
I don't know. And I think that's the best answer I give to people. I don't know, nor do I think about it. I do know in like ways, but you know, everybody looks for this origin story. I've had so many moments in my life that I could account it to. I don't think there's one individual thing. I think it's a series of things.
I agree.
But I will tell you, my biggest driver was frustration and desperation and depression. Right?
Okay.
Those are your biggest ones.
So some struggles.
Always, of course.
Okay.
But then you start to, for me, you know, you go through these moments. I'll tell you, you know, you don't have children yet.
No.
Newly engaged. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing. And
I appreciate that.
I'm a big fan of partnerships. I think
Thank you.
Everybody needs a number two and vice versa. You need to be
agree.
number two to everybody. I think that's a part of life.
Sir.
But I will tell you, you know, life it comes in stages, ups and downs. And people just want the ups and they look at the downs. And when I met my wife, it was, you know, we had our own struggles. As a police officer, you have different struggles unique to that profession, as is every profession. But we stuck through it. And then, you know, one of the things I don't know, I got this like fight. I think everybody has it, and I'll be a little arrogant here because there's no way for me to explain it than to be a little bit more arrogant on it. Was I never accept, like in our household growing up, you could never accept defeat, even with a sibling, or you can never accept defeat. Like you could never be a coward or be number two to somebody or have somebody as your master. Just could never happen. It's just not the way we were raised. I'll use that as a little bit part of it, but you get into there. And then whenever you get faced with really tough things, so years of policing, your upbringing, tough times, tough marriage, you know, your own personal issues, what policing does, and I think it's beautiful, and I think it's such a unique, and people that get to do the profession are very lucky to do it, if you look at it that way, is it allows you to live 1,000 lifetimes in 30 years. You know, you're the highs and lows.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're just on the low part. So for us as a cop, you get out there for 12 hours a day and you have 10 interactions. It's a paid interaction. It's part of your job. But for all these people, these are moments they're going to remember forever. And you get to be an intimate part of that. And, you know, you can look around, and if you step outside of yourself a little bit and you look at the people and you realize, holy cow, you know, you find the optimism in it. You know, the guy who loses his son to suicide but still shows up to work the next day, still wakes up, realizes he's got other kids. The woman who's been a victim of domestic violence for 10 years and has the courage to make the phone call to say, I'm done, I think I'm going to die at this point. You know, the person who runs away from an abductor, like those type of things you find into that. So you have all that, and then I had my children, and then you start to look at things a little bit.
Everyone says that.
I became very emotional after kids, right? Yeah. Before I was like rough, tough, and everything was this. Everything was this, because I would win. Okay, I would win. I'm good at talking. I knew how to fight if I had to. I was a police officer, so you can get away with blunt force, but you age. You get tired. You get injured. You don't have the energy for it anymore.
Yeah.
You can't fight everybody.
Yeah.
Then I had my children, and I realized, well, there's so much love here. It's the first time I felt unconditional love.
Amazing.
Because it's your kids.
Yeah.
You know, my wife can throw up on me. I love her to pieces, but I'll be like, this has turned me off.
What the heck?
You know, my kid can throw up on me, poo on me. Does not matter.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. You have this unconditional love for your kid. That made me feel a lot better. And then as your kids grow, you grow.
Yeah.
People will say your life changes instantly. It doesn't. I mean, I remember my wife giving birth with our first, and we go to our temple on the way home to get blessings, and then we came home, and now it's just me and her and this new baby. And I look at her like, now what do you want to do? Should I order pizza? There's no, for me, there was no aha. It just slowly, things adjust. And then as I got older and I became a parent, parents will do, most healthy parents will do what they can to give their children a better life. Well, part of that for me was obviously you got to do the hustle financially. You got to make things happen, which is why I opened a business. And, you know, my wife didn't work for the first 4 years because it didn't make financial sense for us. So I was working a lot more and figuring out ways to make money and move ahead in my career. But also you want to, you know, I look at my kids then and I'm like, man, like, you know, without making it seem any worse, like my parents did the best that they could do.
Exactly.
Okay, they did the best that they could do. I'm totally empathetic and sympathetic towards that. but I didn't want to repeat a lot of things with the kids. But I found myself naturally going back that way. So opens up some questions. Luckily, through policing, we have a lot of mental health support. So probably when I was about 33, 34 is when I started to recognize, like, oh, I don't like who I am in my mind. So you're not saying this to people. We're all really good at putting up a shell.
Especially men, right?
Men, we're good at it,
Yeah.
right? You're a big, tough guy. You gotta, everything's good. So, but internally before bed, that quietness.
Could relate. So many men can relate to that.
I'm like, man, I don't like who I am. I don't like the position that I'm in. You know, I knew I was a loving and good father. I knew I was a loving and good husband, but I knew I could have been better, and I felt terrible. So I started to I took up the mental health help. So I started to see a psychologist. And then you see a psychologist, and again, you have this resistance. And I advocate to everybody to go through. We'll get a physical trainer to go work out in the gym. If you have a fight, you're going to get a boxing coach, a wrestling coach, or whatever coach. We'll go to that. But we didn't take the coaches for the brains. And look, psychologists, and they go to school for this. It's kind of their thing. So I decided to take it up on it. I went to a psychologist in my neighborhood that I already knew. So I went to her, and she was great. But it took me about a year to figure out how to be coachable. I'll tell you kind of my moment with her. So I came into this. You know, I tell her the story. I said, look, I've been a police officer for a long time. Here's kind of a little bit about my upbringing, but I want to, but there's stuff about kind of how I operate with my kids that I don't like. And I want to figure this out before it's too late. Like, am I wrong? Am I right? Like, where's the issues here? So at the very beginning, she gives me these surveys, and you fill out these surveys, and she takes them back, and they don't tell you the results of the surveys. So I do this at the beginning. A year goes by. I go through my ups and downs. You know, I'm not really paying too much attention to it. I'm a little bit of stubborn, hard-headed, so I keep pushing forward. A year passes, and I'm like, hey, like those surveys that I did, like, what was I? And she's like, before I tell you, she's like, let's redo them. So she gives them to me face down. And she goes, I want you to fill this out when you get home. She's like, I don't want you to look at it now. Fill it at home. I'm like, yeah, no issues. So I play cool, but the entire time, like, what's this going to be?
A curiosity.
Yeah, so I leave, I take it, and she says before I leave, she goes, hey, FYI, if you get triggered by any of these questions, it's normal, it's okay. And I hate that word triggered.
Yes, I agree.
All right, I hate it. So I'm like, hey, yeah, whatever. I take off, I get in my car right away, I flip it over, and the first question actually triggered me. I went into this headspace, and the first question was, do you avoid certain places or people because of past experiences? And I do. And I was like, man, and that just did something for me. And the colors changed. The colors became gray. And now I knew, oh, dude, I need help here. So I ended up going back to her. I said, what was I? And she says like a word. This is where you were on severe index. She goes, this is where you were. You've gotten better. And I did it, and it's just personal preference. I did it with no medication, you know, so, but now I was coachable. So I'd come back and I was like, what do I need to do? And she gave me, you know, now I was willing to work with her. I was willing to take direction, which was very difficult. But hearing the terms, right? If you hear a word like you have severe depression, you have PTSD, you have anxiety.
Those labels
This is where the part of me kicked into, like, I'm a slave to nobody and nothing.
Yes.
Especially a label. And what I had known so much about it through policing, you get extensive training, you're dealing with suicidal people all the time. And right away I was pissed. And I was pissed because now I understood a little bit more from the other half of the table. And what I will tell you, the part that I hate the most is when people say those words, they put a period at the end of it. It's not a period. It's a comma. Things get better. So that mentality of, this is not a period here. I went back and I said, okay, I'm here now. What do I got to do? And then she started to give me really good tools, like cognitive behavioral therapy is really good.
Right.
You know, do you catastrophize things? Do you overgeneralize? So then I started focusing on that a little bit more, and it did make things different for me. And then you realize, well, you know, without sounding too cheesy, and I don't like to get in the realm of the Instagram quotes and all that stuff. Which, look, I do believe there's truth to all that stuff, but the truth comes behind the action of doing what's being said.
Right.
You know, believe in yourself. Okay, don't post it. Why do you got to just do it?
Yeah.
Just do it. I love Nike's slogan, right? Just do it. Just do it. And so you start to take risks. You start to do things. Risks is a bad word, I like to say, you take opportunities. I like to say you get lucky, because my definition of luck is when opportunity meets preparation.
That's exactly right.
All right. So I tell people, I said, I got lucky, and they don't understand it, nor should they. People see the position that I'm in now, which I'm very fortunate enough to be in. If I were to show you the people in my phone, it's pretty amazing people, the people I talk to regularly, the people who believe in me. Then I'm very proud of all that stuff. And people say, man, you're lucky. I said, absolutely.
Right.
I don't need to get into the nitty gritty of why I'm lucky and what it means to me.
But that journey is a testament to where you are now, right? That's the realness of it. And the best people are the ones who have been through things.
Absolutely.
And that awareness and that humility that you had and that commitment to improve, it was an internal dialogue that you dealt with yourself, which so many people can relate to that. And it's a beautiful thing. And I appreciate you sharing that, especially for young men and men that are listening, right? We tend to not want to engage with the emotional side of ourselves, but there's real growth in that, because this life is a long one. And like you said, it's not a period, it's a comma, it's everlasting. We're always learning, we're always improving, we're always growing. There might be some darkness ahead, but you better believe that there's going to be some light at the end of that darkness, just like there was previously.
Yeah, know when it's a period, know when it's a comma.
Yes.
Things suck, comma, right now.
Yes.
Okay, things are amazing, comma, right now, because you can't get caught in that trap either.
Yeah.
Things aren't always up. And you have this layer of anxiety where when things are going great, for me, I'm always like, well, what's going to go wrong? Right. And it doesn't hinder me from pushing forward. One of the things that you kind of learn is, I've learned, I'll say, for example, is the first time I came across somebody who died of cancer that had the same birth date as me. Birth year, I should say, sorry.
Right,
then you go, holy cow, like, I'm not young anymore. You see pictures of yourself as you get older, you don't recognize yourself. In my head, I'm still the same. People that have known me since I was a kid, they all call me Ronnie. So if I meet anybody and they call me Ronnie, it's somebody who's known me since like back in the day. It's only Ron when I became a cop. I shortened it to, I thought it sounds more professional, right? So, but in my head, I'm still Ronnie. But then when you see pictures of yourself, you get injuries, you wake up and when you're tired because you sat down for too long, like
Ron, when I turned 30, I was like, oh man, it's here. And then all of a sudden my knees are starting to get sore. I need to go to physio and stuff. It's a part of the journey, but it's an intimidating transition in your life as you grow, as you get older, right?
Yeah, you just got to stay competitive and you got to stay
young in the mind.
Young in the mind.
Stay young in the mind and healthy, and with the things you engage with will determine your life.
Yeah. It's again, the thing, you bring up a great point. You said the things you engage with.
Yeah.
I call it participating.
Right.
I don't understand why people don't participate. It's a very small word, like we said, making, it's not making a big thing, a little thing big, it's making a big thing little.
Yeah.
I put it down to participate. I was at a high school on 2 Fridays ago, so I still do a high school circuit.
Oh, okay,
I do
amazing.
Assemblies and all that stuff in Toronto. I was
Is
in the
that
West
some
End.
of the videos on your Instagram? Are you speaking to students?
Yeah, high school students.
Amazing.
I go into some of the toughest areas in Toronto, Jane and Finch, Rexdale, Blackwood, and Scarborough. I still stay on that. I don't broadcast most of it.
Okay.
And I get invited to universities and colleges for the same thing. And what I do is when I go in there, I talk about the participation, how important it is. And one of the things I tell everybody, and I mean this so much so, is like, why are you stopping yourself from participating? Just participate. You have nothing to lose here and everything to gain. I'll be in a class, you ask a question, hey guys, what did you do yesterday? Nobody puts their hand up. Well, this is your biggest problem right now. The world, as it opens up to you, it's not going to open up for those who don't participate. Nobody cares about your potential. I don't like the word potential, because potential is a waste. And I've seen that even in policing. I've seen it in business. I've seen it in other things where, great example, I know cops who are street cops, and some of them think they're so above this. So they sit in their cars and they only go to the big stuff. And when they do, they're like, I know this and I know that. Nobody's going to give you an opportunity because you haven't shown that you're the best at this.
Yes.
I'm not going to wait for you and say, oh yeah, well, I worked in drug squad. If I worked in guns, you'd see what I can do. I don't see it right now. No, I'm not giving you that chance for somebody who's hustling to show their worth and give their worth. These guys are not participating. They don't understand the scope of things. Nobody sees the value in you because they're figuring themselves out. We're all operating in our own little multiverse. Sometimes we intersect, sometimes we don't. The only way you can get into somebody else's universe is to participate and put yourself out there. All of the things that I'm lucky to have been involved in, it's not because somebody came and said, pal, here's an opportunity. I put myself in the position again to get lucky. I prepared myself for an opportunity and I participated in the steps that was required to the best of my ability. And it just so happened when I got there, I said, this is what I want to do. And that's the other part. Even when I was a sergeant in PL Police, I would tell the people that I work with, and even now in my role in the company that I'm in, the people under me, I'm like, you have to tell me what you want.
Yes.
I don't know. So if you tell me, hey, I want to work, if you're a cop and you work for me, you say, look, I'd like to work in K9. I'd like to work in the Marine unit. I'd like to be an attack officer. You have to tell me that so I can help you get there. But don't think inherently I have the time or care to want to dive into your life and figure out where it is. I have other stuff I have to deal with. So with the opportunities we have to speak, the 2 minutes you have, dude, you just tell me.
Make it count.
Just tell me what you want, and then I'll tell you what you need to do, and then I'll check in to make sure, have you hit these steps, and I can start opening up doors. It's a lack of participation.
That's exactly right.
Even in the high schools. You know, the last one I did was a school in Rexdale last Friday, and there was 500 students. Okay.
Quite a bit. Oh, so okay.
Yeah, it was big. I'll do the full school on assemblies. And then what I try to focus is on grade 11s and 12s because they're going to transition into the real world, especially in these hard-hit areas where it's guns, gangs, crime, poverty. Like those are where I want to focus. So when I talk to all of them, because I'm preparing them for the real life where you might not like what's happening in school now. You're going to show up and you're disconnected. You're not participating in class. You're at school because it's a safe place. Your friends are here. But you're not committed to this place. And they're looking forward to school ending. And my big wake-up call to them is, what do you think happens next?
I went through that experience too. College finished, and then it's like, what does happen next? A lot of people, they don't, that's beautiful that you're laying that out for them. Plant that seed for them.
Yeah, and then in that same group, I'll ask, who here knows what they want to do? I break it down to a very simple thing: vision, mission, core values. I believe in that. You know, vision is, where do we want to be? Mission is, how are we going to get there? Core values is, who do we represent, or what do we become in the process of getting there? And so with this high school group, I had said, who knows what they want to do? Out of the 500, about 5 kids put up their hand. You know, math teacher, engineer, lawyer, doctor. And then my follow-up is, okay, so they know the vision. My follow-up is, do you know what you need to do to get there? Yes, I need to go to this university. I need to get this accreditation. I need to get this certification. So they have the mission. Okay, and then who is your favorite teacher? Who was your favorite doctor? What type of doctor do you want to be? I want to be kind, caring, compassionate, educated, knowledgeable. I want to be an expert. They figured it out. And they were willing to participate in the conversation to now make it a reality. And then I looked at the other 495 students and I said, you're going to work for these people, just so you know.
It's amazing how you laid that out.
Right? And then you see the other people kind of light up and they go, oh, he's right. Now they know what they want to do. They haven't told anybody. They're waiting. Some of them are waiting for somebody to say, you should do this. You should be good at that. I hate saying this, but it's the truth, and it's kind of played out, but it's the truth. Is nobody's coming to save you. I tell every one of those kids, nobody is going to walk into your life and save you. This is up to you. And the sooner you recognize that, the easier life is going to be for you. It's going to get better, but don't wait, because before you know it, you're going to be 30.
Yes.
Time's coming for everybody, man. It waits for nobody.
That's right.
We're all subject to it. And they could look at me and say, man, you're an older guy, and I'm 42 now. I said, just wait. It's coming for you too.
Young people especially need advice like that. They need real advice, the real stuff. And I think that, and I'm optimistic that's for at least a certain percentage of them, it will plant that seed. And I'm really hopeful for that. Let's talk a little bit about policing. You mentioned it a little bit there and throughout our conversation so far. What has policing kind of done for you? And take us through your journey as a police officer. Was it something you always wanted to do? How did it kind of begin? And how did you kind of end as well? Like what was that journey like?
Hey man, you know what I liked about Toronto was every other place was looking for a reason not to hire me. Toronto was looking for every reason to hire me.
Amazing.
I remember my cover letter for Toronto Police. I'd put down, here's all the dirt on me in my cover letter.
Really?
Here's all the dirt on me. Here's all the times I've been rejected. I'm putting it out there because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste mine. I got a call.
That's amazing.
They were like, listen, thank you. Can you come in for an interview? Absolutely. You know, so I'd fixed everything. I changed my friend group up. I had secure jobs at that point. I was a lot more stable, on paper. And then when they gave me the opportunity, I just felt this, you feel this drive to be like, I want to prove them right. Mm-hmm. So then I just worked my butt off for 10 years. My first 10 years was proving them right to say, five times I got rejected by 3 different police services. And then you go on, you have that thing. And then initially I got in to catch bad guys. Initially, that's the simplest way to put it. Mm-hmm. And then it was, back then the legal system was a little bit more reasonable than what it is now.
Right.
you would catch violent criminals and they would actually be held in jail. They would face trials. They would face good sentences deserving of the crime that they committed and the people that they victimized.
And what year was that, would you say, Ron?
2006.
2006.
2006 to about 2008, things were great. And then as they went on and I moved on my policing, the system started to get a little bit more messed up. There was a lot more of this social justice woke stuff. And you know, social justice is an interesting term. Justice is just justice. You don't need anything else to it. Simple as that.
It's a great way to put it.
You don't need this, just justice. Everybody knows what that means. So we just had this, but it started to really impact ideologies from politicians, courts, juries as well, right?
time.
So normal people that were sitting on juries were more educated or aware of some of the mishaps and some of the inappropriateness, because it's not to say that there's no room for that. Look, got to be reasonable. Everything goes too far at some point. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It's not for me to decide. But we do all that, and then slowly I transition into, at some point, and I'll tell you where it struck for me. Part of leaving Guns and Gangs the first time was, now it was 2014, 2015. At the time that I'm working on the street teams at Guns and Gangs, 2016, something happened, man, which we know now what it was. The legal justice system changed a little bit in 2019, but the workings were happening. But I could tell you, we were doing this search warrant for a guy who had already been convicted of 2 guns. At the time, on his 3rd gun, he's looking at least 12 years in jail. We do the search warrant. We kick in the door. We pull him out. He's a huge dude. Just got his head down. Must have been like 6'5", 6'6", jacked up. Cooperative, no issues. We arrest them. And then part of my job on the teams was I would do the debriefs. I would talk to these bad guys and girls and develop a relationship. And it's like the movies. I catch you with a gun. I want to know where you got the gun from and who else do you know.
Yes.
So we try to flip everybody, try to roll everybody. That was part of my job. I was good with building rapport with these guys and girls. So I got this guy outside, and I remember I got him in the hallway of his condo. I look in his condo, and he's got 2 pictures of his kids, same age as my kids. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm looking at those kids, and I look to him, and my first thought was, these kids are not going to see you for 12 years.
Yeah.
You know, it was different for me then. Then it was different because I was looking at the kids, and I thought, my kids not see me for 12 years. You know, and then at the time, I'd done so much volunteer work in Rexdale with all these kids through football programs that were gang involved or at risk of gang involvement. I looked at this guy as one of those kids. And then my questions to him became, well, where did you grow up? What happened to you? Tell me about your mom and dad. Tell me about school. Like, he was a nice guy, one-on-one. Was he a criminal? Yeah. Was he a gunman? For sure. But as we started speaking, I knew a little bit about his story, and I was like, okay, given the life he had and the trajectory, what else are we expecting is going to happen? Then it became different for me. And then I remember talking to him, and I'm like, dude, you got to work with me here. Okay, this is the 3rd gun we got with you on here. I need to know about drugs. I need to know about guns, because your kids are not going to see you. You get that now. Like, we got a tight case on you. You're done. Didn't say a word, man. He just ate it. And I felt good we got the gun. I felt good we got the criminal. I did not feel good going home that day as a dad. Now, I'm not justifying. I'm not excusing. I'm just saying how I felt. That was the beginning for me to say, I flipped the mentality of I want to catch bad guys to I want to save lives. It's a big flip.
Yeah.
And then I'd come back to work, and I said, okay, well, like how is this happening? Which is the beginning of me getting in a little bit of reputation in politics. And then I started looking into, dude, there's thousands of these guys here. Nice guy one-on-one. If things were different for him, I'm sure he would have been different. So I'm living in this ideological world on a different side of the house now. So then you look at things differently. You look at people differently. And then you look at victims of crime. You look at crackheads that are 19 years old, 20 years old, girls involved in sex trafficking from the age of 13. Now they're involved in serious drug addiction. They're running guns for these guys. What did we expect is going to happen here? They belong to people. They're somebody's kid. They're somebody's parent. They're somebody's mom or dad. And we just discard them.
How important do you think it is intervention at a certain time? You know, like when you were a resource officer, you really helped out. You used sport as a tool. How important do you think it is at a certain time to intervene and then provide some sort of meaning or purpose for these people?
Intervention is important all the time. Look, we have, I call it the EPIS model: education, prevention, intervention, and suppression. So I do a lecture circuit to law enforcement and government agencies on the importance of a comprehensive model. The education being, we should be collecting data and information throughout this entire cycle, and we should be sharing that information among each other, being all the stakeholders, being the school boards, the police, the hospitals, public health, you know, children's aid. why are we not talking to each other? Not to hurt anybody. Why are we not sharing the raw data to say this is what makes really healthy people and this is what makes people who don't end up so healthy? We need that to really govern policy and legislation.
For sure.
Or else we just have people running these ideas of saying, you know what's a good idea? We should make a basketball court. What's the model here? How did we come to this conclusion that what's going to solve this issue for this community? It's a basketball court. It's so ignorant. And it's so inappropriate, and it's a waste of time and money. It doesn't get implemented because we're not sharing actual data. So education was important. So I would collect data, surveys, interviews, wash the data so it's clean. You could never source it back to the person. So we connect the data, and then we'd share that data among our partner groups.
How important do you think it is for intervention at a certain time in a young person's life to sort of guide them in the opposite direction of maybe a not so good direction that they are going? How important is intervention?
Look, intervention is probably one of the most important parts of it. Like there's 4 things that I've always advocated for: education, prevention, intervention, and suppression being the last one. Education being, what are we learning? So even in all the stuff I did in policing when I was working with at-risk youth or creating the gang exit strategy, one of the things we did is we collected a lot of data and we'd wash the data. So there's nothing personal for anything, but we would share it with like Children's Aid, the school boards, any of our partner groups in policing or law enforcement, the city of Toronto. So it would never identify who it came from, but would paint a really good picture of things that were common among everybody participating, like parental criminality, addiction to drugs or alcohol, low economic output or potential. And it's important to do because that should really direct and guide legislation and policy. One of the things that we see pop up all the time in every major city, and Toronto's no different, is we got a crime-ridden community, we got a high amount of poverty, we have at-risk kids, and what do? They throw up a basketball court. I don't understand the rationale to why a basketball court, but there's really no rhyme or reason. They just feel like this is the thing to do. It actually falls under what's called conventional wisdom, which I stray away from. Conventional wisdom is, if we believe it to be true, it must be true. Generally, those type of decisions happen where imagine you and I never spent a day into a tough neighborhood, but we sat here and we powwowed and we said, you know what this community needs? They need an ice rink. We've done no input into it. So education is important to develop the input to know what's going to work and what's happening for us to guide policy, legislation, and money. Where do we invest in the money? Second to that is prevention. And prevention is important because the education drives prevention. Without knowing what's happening, we don't know how to intervene before the intervention. We don't know how to prevent things. And prevention is all about education. Best example I tell people is if I don't educate you that you should stop at a red light, you don't know to stop at a red light. We have to include that into a line of messaging that is important to who our target market is. And government is terrible at that because we just think peer to peer. If I word things a certain way and the city of Toronto understands it and Children's Aid understands, well, we did our job. Who's our market for this? Who do we want to use our product or service? It's got to be the community. So they have to have buy-in to, how do you prefer messaging communicated to? Do you want a phone call, a flyer? Do you want a door knock? Do you want a community event? That's important. So you got education, prevention. Now this is where intervention comes into play. Intervention is critical. It's important. But the strategy of intervention that I think is the most important is you have to be able to just be honest about what's happening and have an open and honest discussion. Now, this is where I'm a little bit different in that, and this is where I would recommend people just through experience in that field is I'll see a lot of young people in particular or inexperienced people that feel like if I am blunt, that's a respectable quality. It's not. It's very hurtful. It's very mean. We have to realize that when we're intervening with somebody, we don't know, nor do they know what they're doing is probably not beneficial or wrong under a general understanding of right and wrong. So the second you come in, and if I tell you every day when you come in and you wear your shirt on, let's say you're wearing your shirt inside out and you've done this for 7 days in a row, the form of intervention would be, I can either call you an idiot and be like, pal, idiot, you've been wearing your shirt inside out for 7 days. Number one, you're embarrassed by it, all right? And number two, it's not probably the most effective way to communicate with you in terms of continuing our relationship. You can be honest with people, but very respectful in the process, which I always advocate for. Additionally, question, and not question. Maybe you don't understand something. Maybe I don't understand what's happening. Maybe that's a shirt that somebody gave you and you don't like the logo on the front for a variety of reasons, but you're like, look, I like the shirt. It's all I got. So yeah, I wear it inside out. Rather than making a big deal out of it. Additionally, there's nothing wrong with grabbing you aside and saying, yo, Steph, I talked to you for a second, man? Yo, your shirt's been inside out for 7 days. Do you know that? It's saving you the humility of it. Right? You're already going to be embarrassed by it, but here we have this kind of culture or this mindset of, well, we're going to be blunt and honest, and that's the right way. You cannot operate in this world without other people. Your life is going to be very lonely and very hard, and we know what that leads to. Depression, It leads to suicide. It leads to a lot of other things. You can't do anything without a community of people around you. When you build a community, how you build strong relationships is you don't take from those relationships, you give to those relationships. You know, a friend of mine wrote a book, gave it to me, and part of his book, one thing I really liked out of it, is he doesn't call it networking, he calls it net giving. So he goes, I don't look at my relationships to what can I get out of the relationship. He says, I look to these relationships for what can I give.
I love that.
And I've adopted that, and dude, it works. When I was forming partnership work, which in Toronto Police, I'd brought in 35 different partner agencies. At the beginning of my relationships to barter for services and how we're gonna work together, every conversation I had would be like, I need this, I need that, we need this from you, and this is where we need you, and it's gonna help you. Every time I do that, it was this, right? We have nothing to give, and this guy keeps asking. So any phone call, conversation, or text message rarely returned or never happened. I have a conversation with him. My buddy gives me this book out of desperation and frustration, which is a big driver. I go to one meeting. It's a very high-level meeting with some influential people in the city of Toronto at all different levels. And I went into this meeting, and I had a quarterly meeting. I'd have to meet with these people to give them updates on what we were doing and where we are. And I came into this meeting after having that conversation and reading his book, and I said, guys, here's where we are. Here's where I know we can be. Here's what I think we need to get there. What can I do to get us these things? What can I do for you? Change the entire conversation in the room. Now I became a part of the solution, and they were realizing I'm willing to do the heavy work. It worked so well for me, and the same thing with that type of mentality is what I apply to the intervention component. People don't know what they don't know. And, you know, it's embarrassing for people on a very personal scale. They don't want to be embarrassed in public. They want to feel ashamed, and they might have other reasons to why they're doing what they're doing. So we need to understand part of the education. But then outside of the education, prevention, and intervention, which is so important, is the suppression component. When we recognize bad things are happening, we have to deal with those bad things.
Right.
Nobody wants to talk about that part of the problem. Right now we have rampant crime throughout all of Canada, and Toronto especially well. And for whatever reason, the conversations always go on prevention and intervention. That's where we invest the money. Well, if they never ended up like this, they're already here. We have to deal with the threat as threats. And until we acknowledge that that is the most critical part of the conversations, none of these programs and projects are going to work. A basketball court will never be used for its intended purpose if it becomes a drug dealing haven or becomes an area where drive-by shootings are happening. We have to deal with the drug dealing and the drive-by shooters to ensure that this gets used for its intended purpose. But for whatever reason, when we get on the topic of going after the bad guys and the bad girls responsible for this, we fall under the intervention and prevention sympathetic lens, which is important when they're in custody and when they're in a controlled environment where the 10% of all violent criminals responsible for 100% of the violent crime, they need to be housed in a safe and secure area so the rest of the world can operate.
Exactly.
Instead, we're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into programs that can never get taken off of the ground because it's not safe for the community. We need to first flip that. So while it's EPIS, education, prevention, intervention, and suppression, the actual term should be backwards. Intervention. So suppression, intervention, prevention, and education at the end. Because we need to deal with the threats before we can move forward. So intervention is important all of the time. How we intervene is important. The other part of that intervention is when we intervene, it should never be an intervention that is an ultimatum. It's either this or that. We need to understand that for different people, different things happening. Most of the time you get cooperation and compliance when the person feels like they are the one making the decision. So the education component is to say, look, you got your shirt on backwards. Look, man, I would love for you to wear your shirt normally if everything lines up. So why don't you go change it? I think that's a great idea. Or number two, you don't change it and you can't come into the room. The idea is you want to have the person make the decision. Yeah,
it's like we were saying a little bit earlier. It's not about how you say it sometimes. It's not about what you say. It's how you say it, right? It's that real approach. And I want to stay on that. I want to get a little bit further. You mentioned crime here. A lot of Canadians are concerned about crime and things that are happening in Canada right now. Simply put, what do you think is what do you think is happening in Canada? Why is the crime so high, and what can we do to fix it?
Yeah, well, listen, everything rises and falls on leadership. Everything. Right. Good businesses, good teams, good leadership always takes it to the top. When you have and there's adages you can find online, you can find different quotes for it, but peacetime leaders is a great time. When everything is going great, it's easy. When the company's making money, it's fantastic to be a CEO. When the country's not at war, it's great to be a president or a prime minister. Great times, and you can have the luxury of talking about problems that probably aren't real problems. instead of preparing for the hard times and ensuring that we stay on the path without it. I think what happened is Canada was in such a good place up to 2015 that we had the luxury to then dive deeper into issues that weren't potentially as important as what they were led on to be. I think they started to drive real legislation and real thought process and ideologies that ultimately, when it comes down to us as human beings, and what we're seeing now is we're seeing wars all over the world, and with the advent of social media and technology, we get to see what that looks like intimately through your phone. And people look at it and they go, this is horrific. This has been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. This is part of human nature. Unfortunately, is this the barbarism that's built into our DNA to survive. So during peacetime, it's great to be peaceful, but we lost scope of there's always a potential for danger. And while we never forefront that, you don't lead with that type of scare tactics, you should be prepared. You should always be prepared. So 2015, to get more political on this end, Stephen Harper is no longer the prime minister and Justin Trudeau comes in. At the time, crime was at an all-time low.
That's right.
Economic development was great. We had low unemployment. People could still buy a house in Canada. Taxes were moderate and reasonable. And we kind of got accustomed to that. And then what happens is then you have a new prime minister and a new political party come into play. And this political party, regardless of your political beliefs or not, I have never felt more divided as a Canadian and as a person
100%.
than in the last 9 years. I had gone to an event, I've been doing a bunch of public talks, and I still remember this. Sometime in and around 2018, 19, I got introduced as a POC. And I stopped and I get on the mic and there's like 1,000 people in the audience, and I look at the person who introduced me and I said, what is a POC? And she said, you're a person of color. And I said, since when? Like, this is how I'm being introduced. Not the fact that I was a cop for, 20 years and I had done all this volunteer work and I gotten all these awards and I was a former entrepreneur. None of that mattered. This is what you led with. It didn't even matter that I was born in Toronto. Like, I'm a Canadian through and through. This is what you led with. And at the time, like everybody else, I was just like, okay, you just go along with it, you move on, right? So we have this type of thinking in my mind, this divisive thinking of it doesn't matter who you are. What matters is every other detail about you, and you need to find a box or a category to fit into, because that's being inclusive. In fact, it was the most divided thing I've ever come across.
Exactly.
Right? It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, what you believe in, or who you love. That doesn't matter. What matters is, are you a Canadian? Are you a good person? Are you doing your best? Let's just stop right there. That's a very simplified version of what should matter. Are you nice to be around? Are you helpful? Are you trying? Like, are you doing good?
The content of your character is how you should be judging.
Who you are as a person is the most important part of you. Right. And then what are we doing as a country or as a government to support you in your dreams if we know they're not going to hurt anybody? That should be what it is. But instead we get divided. So what happens is, in the criminal landscape for Canada, 2019, the Liberal government introduces and enacts Bill C-75, which what brings this bill into play is a Bail Reform Act. Was between about 2015 to 2019-ish, there was about 5 major criminal courts cases that went to the Supreme Court of Canada. All of them were withdrawn. Now, these criminal cases had to do with child molestation and homicides. They were pretty serious stuff, and the evidence was overwhelming. The reason they get withdrawn is because as a Canadian, under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Canada, we all have a right to a speedy trial. So these people were arrested, they were put on bail or kept in custody, and they were supposed to have their trial within a speedy time. Well, with all of these cases, they'd taken anywhere from 3 to 5 years to go to court. Their lawyers had successfully brought in a charter application to say, you know what, guys, he has a right, Steph has a right, even though he's before the courts for a murder, he has a right to a speedy trial. And our Charter of Rights and Freedoms supersedes everything. Criminal code comes underneath it. Your rights and freedoms are that valued in Canada, and just like in the States, the constitutional rights. So in the US, we have this charter. They said, my client here who did this murder or did this child molestation, you breached their rights. And our Supreme Court of Canada withdrew them. Now look, it took 5 years to get there, so that does fall under the Charter of Rights. But what that forces the government to do, it looks into the administration of justice. So our Liberal government at the time invokes this inquiry into what happened for this to happen to prevent it from happening again. And they realize a multitude of things. One of the things they realize is that our criminal court system is so inundated with crime as it began to grow over the last 4 or 5 years. And additionally, the requirements from courts became high because juries were watching movies. And juries would be like, if there's no DNA, if there's no fingerprint, the person didn't commit the crime, regardless of if the evidence was there. I could capture somebody on camera committing a murder, but the defense lawyer would say to a jury, well, there's no DNA. And the jury would go, wow, there's no DNA. And then we'd be ordered as police officers to go and get DNA. Then you'd have to go through this and influx, this administration of justice with just request after request. So judges weren't properly educated, juries weren't properly educated, prosecutors were trying to keep up. So the whole thing falls apart. Then they run this inquest into what's happening in the judicial system. When they run it, they bring in experts from both sides of the house. They bring in chiefs of police, victims of crime, special interest groups that all come in and say, look, guys, here's the issue with the criminal justice system in Canada. Here's where we're at. And then you have the other half, which is defense lawyers, people who were in custody, who brought up their own thing and said, look, guys, this impeded my life. Ultimately, the Liberal government decided to say, what we're going to do is, rather than innovate the court system through technology or creating more courts, hiring more judges, getting more crown prosecutors, really looking at true innovation in the court system, easing up the paperwork burden, which you could totally do in technology. What they leveraged is they said, people of color or minorities and First Nations are overrepresented in the legal justice system. Now, if we were to do what is recommended, which is to create more courts, to create more systems in play to help speed up and reduce this charter infringement to get your trials on there, we could potentially be opening up the floodgates to be able to bring in more people of color and more First and First Nations that are already overrepresented. They never looked into who is the victims of these crimes. It's the same people.
That's right. That's right.
It's one of the most heartbreaking elements of this. The victims became absolutely an afterthought and a footnote in an entire document. And they tried to leverage in that this is good for the victims. This is not good for the victims, as we've seen come to fruition. So this happens, and what they also realized is when they did a total look of all the federal court cases in Canada, about 25% of them were called failed to comply cases, breaches of bail. So they realized we have this one category of offenses, and if people Google bail offenses and bail statistics, you won't find it in Canada because it's called something else. It's called Administration of Justice Offenses, AOJA offenses. Look up that, you'll see all the stats. About 25% of all cases in 2019 in Canada were administration of justice offenses or bail offenses. So what they did is they modified that portion to reduce the input. The court couldn't handle the amount of cases coming in. They looked at the biggest category. They classified those as relatively minor crimes. Breaches get treated separately. And they said, you know what we're going to do? We're not even going to introduce them into the criminal justice system. We're going to change the laws through Bill C-75 to make it so that police officers release people on scene, and the exact wording is as least onerous on the bad guy, on the criminal. So the way I have to set out my conditions whenever I arrested somebody who was breaching their bail or breaching an offense or anything like that, I had to make sure that the conditions didn't ruin their life because that's what they were owed. And then what it became is, prior to this, I would arrest somebody who was breaching a bail. They'd be automatically brought into the court system, into the police station. They'd be held in overnight. They'd have to see a judge or a justice of the peace, and it's called a reverse onus. They'd need to explain to a judge or a justice of the peace, I should be allowed back out into the public on bail. This was a misunderstanding or whatever. And look, we would prepare a document as well. And in not all the cases, but look, we weren't opposed to that either sometimes. The system was in play where if you were on bail, you had to have a show cause. We'd bring you in, you'd have to go see a judge. We're not stupid either. Police were very reasonable on that. Mm-hmm. We would say, look, yeah, he bailed. We're obligated to bring him in. Based on the circumstances, we would put in what's called a detention order or a show cause. We'd say, look, we're not opposed to this guy getting a bail again. Okay, we would do that. Other times we would say, this person is going to kill somebody if you let him on bail.
Right.
And we would list the reasons why. It wasn't like we just subjectively said, yeah, he's going to kill somebody. We'd have to really articulate why. And then they'd make a decision. Everything was reasonable, which is why we had 25% of repeat violent offenders in jail.
Right.
All the cases were in jail.
I wonder what the statistic is now.
It's going to blow your mind. I don't know what it is, but we're seeing it. So what happens is they change it in Bill C-75. Now it becomes a slap on the wrist in 2019. Any repeat violent offender knows that this entire bail system is in their favor. There is no repercussion to doing it. You have guys out on 13 different bails, and the police are handicapped by it. There's something called the ladder principle, and it's a bit of a deeper dive into it. But the way that the criminal justice system was set up, especially for bail, was very different. If you did a stabbing on Monday, and you got bail for it on Monday, and on Wednesday you did a robbery, well, a robbery is not a stabbing. So I have to start at the bottom of the release ladder. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, you did a stabbing on the Monday, and you're accused, so you're innocent until proven guilty, which absolutely I'm into. But then on the Wednesday you do a robbery. Well, robbery's not a stabbing, so this is a brand new offense, so we have to start at the bottom. So you get another bill. you're out before the paperwork's even done.
How quick is it actually, Ron? If you don't, like literally, if somebody commits a crime, how quick can they be in for something like that?
30 minutes at the roadside.
That's
You're not even
unbelievable.
brought in. A lot of times these people are released before the paperwork's even done.
So they commit a crime, they're arrested, and then they're instantly released.
Instant release because that's Bill C-75.
And that's a liberal bill.
They forced us to do that, yeah. They took the hands out of the police. They took any of the common sense out of police. Now, Monday you do the stabbing, you get a bill. Wednesday you do a robbery, you get a bill. You're not in a police station at all. Okay, you're not even going to nothing. You're just back out to live your life. Then the Friday you go to the LCBO and you steal stuff. It's not a robbery or a stabbing, back on bill. The next week you do another stabbing. Now I got you on 2 stabbings.
Okay. So
Now we can bring them in and we can do a heightened bill. You just come to the police station, you're released back up from the police station. 2 weeks later, you do a 3rd stabbing. And that is the point I can take you to a justice of the peace or a judge. And even then, nothing. We had that sex offender released in Durham region. That guy breached a sex offender bail. Got bail again, he's back out. Now the Durham region, there's a special clause where we feel that the public safety is going to be really impacted and this guy's going to victimize again. They put a notice out. He is going to sexually assault somebody. He can't be around kids. He's in your community. On bail. We're waiting for him to victimize somebody else. We're waiting for him to sexually assault another kid. They're doing over-compliance on this, guys. It is not the police here that is the problem. It is the legislation. They have enabled criminals. And any pushback you give to them, the Liberal government will say to you, well, you know, innocent till proven guilty, you want to breach people's rights. No, common sense here. Common sense doesn't exist.
It seems like there's overcompassion for the criminal. And I like how you touched on the victim is not even being taken into account here.
Never.
And you laid out so beautifully on I believe it was your Instagram where I've seen you speaking where you said you can't remove the politics from what's happening right now. And I think for Canadians listening, for people listening, that's very important to understand.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time people may be apolitical or maybe they're not interested in politics, but they're complaining about taxation. They're complaining about the increase in crime, their economic status. But then when the topic of politics come up, they don't want to engage in that. And you raise a good point there. We need to understand that voting does matter and politics does matter. It's not the police, it's the legislation.
Absolutely. Look, I say this now openly, and I think it's a great conversation. We all have group chats, we have message, you have personal conversations. People will talk about a single issue. Economics, the capital gains tax, all this other stuff, right? Oh, I can't afford a house. Then they'll talk about crime. Then they'll talk about anything else. But the second you bring in politics, what do they say? Oh, no, let's not talk politics. There's 3 siblings that exist. One cannot exist without the other, and they have to be interlinked in conversations. The first sibling is economic development. The second sibling is crime. The third one is politics. All 3 of these are interconnected because politics creates the leadership and the infrastructure and the legislation to ensure that the other 2, crime is minimized and economic development is high. Look, I can tell you just based off of an equity scoring index. An equity scoring index is based off of a couple things. It's not what you think. It's not like diversity and equity. It's based off of access to employment, transportation, average median income. What does the household look like? There's a direct correlation to the economic development of a community and the crime. It's directly linked and correlated. There's no question about it. You do not find crime as relevant and as prevalent in high-income areas. Why is that? Right? It's because it's high-income area. There's no desire. There's no need for that. Yet we have areas like Jane and Finch and some other parts in Toronto that have been in poverty for 40 years and they're also high crime. How does this still exist? Terrible policy and legislation. So while all these group chats we talk about are cars getting stolen and somebody breaking into my house, and then somebody brings in, we need to vote for a new government. And then people pipe up, let's not talk politics.
Yeah.
You're not even, guys, we're lying to ourselves at this point here. The solution is not increasing street lighting in your area or putting a bar on your steering wheel. The solution is going after the criminals doing this and ensuring that there's a repercussion to the action. If there is no repercussions on a very basic and human level, there is no solution. And people want to debate this and say, well, you know, that's not the solution. Look, pal, if you get shot and you got a bullet in you, people talk about, you know, they downplay Band-Aid solutions, right? We still need to stop the bleeding.
That's right.
Then we bring in the surgeon. Mm-hmm. Okay, but you can't go straight to surgery. We need to first triage this. And right now the triage is the Band-Aid right now is going after the bad guys. The surgeon comes in to promote the economic development to prevent these kids from becoming bad guys in the first place. That's going to take some time. But we need to have that leadership and that vision right now and that commitment to that strategy to bring in some normalcy to what's common sense. Common sense being you cannot have repeat violent offenders out on bail. We cannot have this as not a priority anymore. And we have to ensure that we have a government that understands the importance of victims because there's a lot more victims than they are bad guys. And nobody ever wants to talk about that. And you look at these victims, and it's a terrible position for them.
It's so amazingly said, and I appreciate you touching on that because it's very important for Canadians to hear. Staying on politics, as I led into the last topic here, what does it mean to you to be conservative?
For me, small government, big people. Conservative is also about lean. You want to be as lean as possible. Under the Liberal government, they've bloated something like 40,000 new jobs. The percentage, I don't remember. It's incredible. And what it means to be a conservative to me is it means to have common sense. And again, it's to empower people, right? There's two elements to it. Some people would see from my background of talking about economic development and poverty kids. One of the first critiques I got into from people who didn't know me that heard about my backstory coming into politics was, you sound like a liberal. I said, how do I sound like a liberal? I said, well, you're talking about this, impoverished areas and poverty. And I go, that's absolutely conservative. Because the conservative mindset is, it is so much cheaper and beneficial and sustainable to build people than it is to solve every problem for them. Mm-hmm. In my mind, the liberal mindset, and I experienced this in policing in Toronto, is, and there's an element of truth because there still needs to be a Band-Aid there. If you go into certain pockets in Toronto, just as the city as well, the concerns of the community are, I can't afford the TTC, I can't afford grocery. They're gonna be most responsive to people that say, let me help you, let me supplement. That's their need, that's their concern. That's valid, and we should take that into consideration. But additionally, where I find the conservative values is, okay, let's address your issue. Let's find out how you got to this point. How do we break this cycle? How do we bring in big business? How do we encourage entrepreneurship? How do we lower taxes? How do we make your dollar worth more again? How do we stimulate a conservative and a Canadian economy so that your kids don't have to go through what you want to go through? Instead, we have 3 generations of people living in community housing in Toronto. There's never a break there. So to me, what conservative means, it means small government, big people.
Yes.
It means also dealing with the Band-Aids, but also ensuring that we're putting our money in the right place to prevent this from happening in the first place. I could put a dollar value for you. A homicide costs a Canadian taxpayer, on a conservative estimate, $5 to $6 million. On a liberal estimate, $17 million. And it's because the cost of crime is much bigger than what people think. They think, oh, there's a crime and the police have to come and the court costs. That's a part of it. You know what else matters is what happens to property value in the area. What happens to the real estate market when it's a high crime area? It dips. What happens when that dips to the people that come in? What's their average median income? It's lower. What does that mean for local businesses? It means we can't have big business because the market there isn't for them. One of my best examples, I said, find me a Starbucks in Rexdale. Find me a Starbucks in Jane and Finch. Why do I use Starbucks? Relatively decent paying job, global company, you can work up in there. Reason why it's a bad business idea, they can't afford it. But if we don't even have those economic opportunities in those areas, it's very easy to come in as a politician or anybody else to say, you can do whatever you want to any of these schools. I can go into these high schools like I do now and say, you could be a lawyer, a police officer, an astronaut. They don't leave within 5 kilometers of where they live. When they look at that window, what do they see? They see Willie's Jerk. They see like Jimmy's convenience store. They see all these. That world doesn't exist for them. And unless we actually present that world to them, or we present them the transportation path through good, TTC subways or streetcars to an economic hub, we're just talking nonsense to these guys. It's fairy dust. But we don't present that. So we need to incentivize that coming in. Now, when you bring in those type of jobs, you bring in those type of businesses where there's a way to go up, now people are making more money.
Yes.
Revitalizes the community naturally. Then we break those cycles because, oh yeah, I worked at the Starbucks. Dude, you should get a job at the Starbucks.
It provides incentive and purpose and meaning.
As we should
somewhere to strive towards.
So for me, conservative is ultimately it's common sense, but also it's the minimization of the government being the solution for you, not to every problem. Dude, the position should be, we're here to help you, man.
Yeah.
We're here to help you.
Yeah.
Wherever we need to help you, keep us educated, keep us informed. Dude, let's help you because what's good for you is good for us. Not we are the solution to all of your problems. And we're going to prioritize the ideologies over the reality of the world. I talk about this often. One of my things I tell people now is I say, when ideology meets the reality of the real world, it hits a stop. And that's where we're at now. You can no longer get in these hyperbole conversations about theory and let's be philosophers here. We're past that. Let's get back to the real world.
That's exactly right. Ron, I appreciate you, man. You laid this out so tremendously, and I think for the Canadian watching, I think they're going to take a lot from this conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on and taking this time and unpacking things the way you did. I have a final segment on Couple Casuals podcast, which I call Salute. Salute, I give an opportunity to the guest to kind of end us off on a words of encouragement, a sentence, something that sticks to you. Just end us off on a note in very Ron fashion.
All big things start small.
There it is. I appreciate you, Ron. I'll be following your journey closely. I hope to have a conversation again, and this was amazing. So I appreciate you taking the time, and best of luck to you, man.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate you guys having me, man. I'm a big fan as well, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. And to you guys, thank you so much. Until next time, love you, nobody else. Ciao.